have a very exciting speaker for you next, and I know you won't want to miss a minute of this. And I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Robert Devenyi. Dr. Devenyi is the medical director and ophthalmologist-in-chief at the Krembil Neuroscience Center at Toronto Western Hospital. He is the only ophthalmologist in Canada who has implanted the Argus 2 Bionic Eye Retinal Prosthesis into patients. You're in for a real treat because both of those patients are here today, and you're going to hear from one of them. He is leading the current trial of the device, which he calls the single most exciting innovation he has seen in his ophthalmological career. This trial is partly funded by the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and there will be time for your questions. But please hold your questions until the very end. So now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Devenyi, and then you'll also meet Orly Shamir, who is the first person who was fitted with the Bionic Eye. So let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Devenyi, our rock star for the hour.
Thank you, Anne, and thanks everyone for coming. It's really, I feel so privileged to be able to be part of this program of what I think really is a very exciting development in medicine. The Foundation Fighting Blindness is very modest when they say they've been part of the whole sponsorship and development of this program. They've been a really huge part of it and have been really very, very major sponsors and have been the reason why this whole program got off the ground at all. So thank you very much. You guys have been amazing. So let's talk about the Bionic Eye. The name of it is called the Argus 2 implant. One thing I think that's important to emphasize, because the worst thing is to give people false hope, it's not for all people who are blind. There's no question as it develops and as it matures, it will be expanded to more and more diagnoses and problems. But currently it's specifically and only for patients with outer retinal degeneration. So what does that mean? One of the diseases, one of the most common diseases that is so-called outer retinal degeneration is Retinitis pigmentosa. If one looks at this diagram of the eye, the light comes in from the left, goes through the pupil, through the eye, and it hits the retina. The retina is like the film of the camera in the back. This is a picture of a normal retina. So a camera was focused through the pupil, inside the eye, and this is what a normal retina looks like. That's the optic nerve, those are the blood vessels, and the retina normally has this kind of orangey look to it. This is a picture of a patient with retinitis pigmentosa, and the obvious thing is you see all these black kind of bony kind of coloration changes there, and that's not the primary abnormality. The primary abnormality is that the rods and cones, the receptors, degenerate for reasons that no one's particularly figured out, and then secondary to the degeneration, this overgrowth of pigment happens. But it's just a very typical appearance of what it looks like, and that's why it's called retinitis pigmentosa. It's this increased pigmentation in the retina, but the abnormality is not that there's more pigment. The abnormality is that the rods and cones have degenerated. It's just a way that we can recognize it and see it when we look clinically. So these are some schematic drawings of what happens. Again, if you keep in mind, this is how the light comes in through the pupil and hits the retina. This is now an enlargement of the retina. So consider that the light is still coming in from the left here. These are the nerves on the surface, and then as the light keeps going in, these are the rods and cones, this green layer here. And then this is the layer of pigment. So again, this is the direction we're going. And this is a normal eye. That's what it's supposed to look like. Someone with outer retinal degeneration or retinitis pigmentosa looks like this. So if you see, this layer of the rods and cones isn't there. They've degenerated. And that's why, if that degeneration progresses enough, that's why one can't see. Because the rods and cones are what detect the light and then send the light along the nerve pathways to the brain. The funny thing is, And for the purposes of this Argus implant, it's a lucky thing. It's a funny pathway that light takes, because normally light comes in, hits the pigment in the back of the retina, gets detected by the rods and cones, and then it comes backwards to the nerve fibers, which are actually on the surface of the retina, and then the image goes through the nerve to the brain. So normally the light passes through the nerves, goes to the receptors, and then comes back to the nerves. And we'll see in a sec why that's important, and we'll see why that funny anatomical feature of the eye is what the Argus could exploit and work the way it does. So we have patients now that have rods and cones that have degenerated. So how can we potentially help these people? Well, there's two possible approaches. One is stem cells, and this is trying to show a needle where we will inject stem cells into this space, and then hopefully one day with stem cells grow new rods and cones. And that's what we all wait for, and that will obviously be a fantastic and very elegant solution. We're quite a ways away from that, and I don't want to be estimating as to how long that will really be when it's going to be able to help people. There are a lot of people working on it in the research world, but it's certainly not here yet. There's a lot of obstacles still to get over. It's one thing to grow rods and cones, but the real challenge, as you can imagine, is not to grow the rods and cones inside the eye, but then you have to connect those rods and cones to all these millions of nerve pathways. And that's the real challenge. There's over 1 million nerves that go from the eye through the optic nerve to the brain. So, yeah, we want to grow rods and cones, but to connect them to these things that are called ganglion cells, which then go to the whole nerve fiber layer, is the real challenge. And that's why certainly stem cells aren't going to be a solution in the near future. But the other solution is the Argus. And this is just my schematic representation of what this is. This is supposed to show the electrodes that we put onto the retina. And we'll see a bunch of other diagrams of that in a moment. But as you can see, these electrodes are placed onto the nerve fiber layer, onto the nerves, which are on the very surface layer of the retina. And that's why it's fortuitous that the structure of the retina is the way it is. Because these nerves are on the very surface, that's why the Argus can stimulate them directly when we implant these electrodes directly onto the surface of the retina. It would be a much more complicated and dangerous operation if we somehow had to bury these electrodes deep into the surface of the retina. But it's a relatively easy thing that we can just put it onto the surface. So that's the principle of the Argus, that the electrodes will now stimulate these nerves directly and essentially ignore the fact that there are no rods and cones. It's essentially just ignored, and we stimulate it in another way. This is a picture of the Argus device. The Argus device consists of two parts. There's a portion that's implanted into and onto the patient's eye. You don't see it. And then there's an external portion, which we'll see, which is a pair of glasses, which is connected with a wire to a little thing that you can wear on your belt or your purse, which is essentially the brains of the whole thing. But the inside of the portion of the eye consists of this piece. Now what this is this is a band that is sewn around the eyeball. These are the receiving and transmitting electrodes that are sewn onto the wall of the eyeball. And then this ribbon, the eyeball is opened up with a little incision, actually a big incision. And then this ribbon cable goes inside, and these are those 60 electrodes that are going to be sitting on the surface of the nerves inside the eye. And this shows schematically what it looks like. This band is around the eyeball's wall. The electronics are all on the wall of the eyeball. And then this ribbon pierces the sclera, the white part of the eye here, and is attached to this array of electrodes, which are held in place on the surface of the retina with just a single titanium tack, like a thumbtack. And what these electrodes will do when they're sitting on the nerve fiber layer is they stimulate electronically the retinal cells It's very similar to years ago the cochlear implants, where people who had lost their vision from eighth nerve deafness, the electronics of a cochlear implant would essentially be stimulating what normally the body would do naturally. And this is not that dissimilar from that very same idea. It's just a much more complicated business when it's to do with vision, because we not only have to stimulate them, but we have to do it in a way that people can get spatial orientation from the stimulation. And that's why it's important to have the 60 different electrodes as they are spaced out over quite a large area, so they're stimulating the different portions of the retina very much in the same way as natural light would stimulate the different portions of the retina. This is just another diagram of the same, showing how these electrodes are sitting on the surface inside the eye, and the electronics are on the outside. And this is the external portion that patients wear. It's a pair of glasses with a little tiny camera in the center in between the two eyepieces that you don't see. There's electronics here which wirelessly will send the image to the electronics on the outside of the eyeball. And then here is a wire that goes to this computer which is worn externally. Now the brilliance of this is manyfold, not the least of which is that all the software is in this external device. So as software updates come about and as advancements come about, it's not that we have to do any kind of invasive surgery to manipulate and change things. It's all updated externally through this device. So it's really very, very well thought out. And this is a diagram showing a patient wearing the camera on the glasses and how the image is sent wirelessly to the transmitting and receiving electrodes on the wall of the eye, and then the image goes along the ribbon to the electrodes. And this is an actual device itself. This is a real Argus 2 device. All the electronics are encased in silicone. When we operate, we have to be very careful because we can't use normal surgical instruments because they would damage the electronics. They've devised very special silicone-tipped instruments with which we manipulate the device during surgery. And throughout the surgery, we take multiple breaks where these external reading devices are used to ensure that the electronics are still functioning and no damage has occurred to the device in the course of the implantation. If there would be damage, and fortunately that hasn't happened, there is always an extra device on hand to replace it if we should have to. So at the Donald Johnson Eye Center at the Toronto Western, we did our first case on June 5th, 2014. It's really been quite a gratifying experience. We've had to amass quite a team, not only a team with surgical experience in the operating room, but then, as we'll hear, a really very large part of this whole experience is the visual rehabilitation that people have to go through. So it's a whole group of professionals that have had to been trained and amassed and developed who we've never had before, to teach people how to use the device, to how to make sense of these new electronic artificial images that they're acquiring is really quite a large undertaking. The surgery went very uneventfully. I think we have a little clip here. Nothing too gruesome, I promise. I made the mistake at one meeting, and I still feel bad about it. It was an after-dinner meeting, and I showed far, far too much. So what we were seeing here as the implant was being sewn onto the surface of the eye, that's the electronics on the outside. Very careful measurements have to be taken as to where the incisions are made and where that ribbon has to enter the eye, because we need to calculate it such that those electrodes end up absolutely smack on the center of the macula. And this is that externally still. Those are those 60 electrodes, which will now be grasped and inserted into the eye. The first step was to use that band to sew it all the way around the eye and to secure the electronics around the wall of the eyeball. And then an incision is made in the eye, and then that ribbon and those large electrodes are placed into the eye. And then here we see here, that's the electronics on the outside. There's the ribbon, which is connected to the electrodes. You can see it's affixed to the eye in a very specific location with sutures measured based on the length of each individual's eye. These are the electrodes now, which will in a moment be inserted into the eye. You can see it's just been pushed through the wound into the eye there now. Now inside the eye you can see the electrodes. That's the little hole where the tack will be put. So now it's just carefully being put into position so that it will end up in the proper central location. And here, inside that instrument is the little tack which will go in that hole. And once it's positioned exactly correctly, there's the tack, and now you can see that everything is in place. And that's the optic nerve. This is the center of the retina, and these 60 electrodes have now been inserted onto the surface of the retina. This is just a small group of the team after the first case, looking with a real look of relief. Some of these people are from the hospital. A lot of the people are engineers from Second Sight, the company who manufactured the device, and they've also been a huge help to us. And we've been lucky. They've picked us as being the one site in Canada that will do this, and it's a huge investment on the part of the company, because with every procedure they have countless numbers of their engineers at the procedure, helping us along the way, helping us ensure that the implants are functioning properly, and training all the staff, intraoperative staff and post-op staff as well. This is a picture of Orly's eye 1 week later, showing the implant in good position. And now 3 months later, you can see, I think we might have to dim the lights. I don't know how easy this will be to see, but one of the tests that we did pre-op was on a black screen, a white square is shown, and the patients are asked to recognize the square, and certainly the patients were not able to do this pre-surgery, but as you'll see in these few examples now, Orly was able to pick these off quite well. So I'm just not sure if the video is running. Oh, I think it is running there. She's able to pick it up, boom, and then the thing gives her back feedback saying correct. I think we have one more. If we can just keep the lights off for a second. It's just hard to see when the squares are just randomly presented. And then patients are asked to identify them. And as you can see, Orly just flawlessly, one after another, was able to pick them off, which is really quite remarkable considering prior to the surgery she wasn't able to do that at all. And this was 3 months after. This is a picture, it's called an OCT, an ocular coherence tomogram, just showing the implant in good apposition to the retina. So this portion is the implant, those are the electrodes, and that's the actual retina, and it's in flat opposition as it needs to be, flat on the surface of the retina. September 4th, we did our second patient. Second patient went even quicker than the first as the team gained experience. This is just many photos from throughout the operation, and this is showing the device that we use that measures the health of all the electronics throughout the procedure. It's a computer printout. Each of those 60 electrodes are represented here, and the health of each of those 60 electrodes and all of the electronics are monitored remotely throughout the operation just to ensure that nothing's been damaged as we proceed. 5 days post-surgery, you can see the patient's eye really looks quite normal. It's a little swollen, but you'd never know that all these crazy large electronics have been implanted into the eye. The eye is very forgiving and heals very well. It's 2 weeks post-implantation that patients begin their intensive visual rehabilitation. We're currently approved to do a 10-patient observational study at the Donald K. Johnson Eye Institute. This device is not yet Health Canada approved. It's Health Canada approved specifically as per the guidelines of our study for 10 patients. We've submitted to Health Canada for approval, and we anticipate getting approval any day. And the reason that'll be important is then we can start the process of going to the Ministry of Health to get financial payment for these devices, and I'm confident that we will get it. The other interesting thing, though, is once it's Health Canada approved, people can pay for them themselves. People can go to their insurance companies and request payment. And in the U.S., apparently there's been quite good success with the insurance companies paying for them. And truthfully, I'm not sure how an insurance company would be able to say no. If one has this disease that there's now one and only one solution for, I don't think it should be that difficult an argument, although insurance companies are in business because they're in business because they say no to covering things, not because they say yes to covering things. So I have no doubt that there will be challenges, but I can be quite a drama queen, and I'll put up a big fight to make sure they cover them. Each implant costs $144,000 US, so it's expensive. Although, in the whole scheme of things, as a lot of you know, we have a drug called Lucentis for macular degeneration. Lucentis costs $2,000 a dose. We've had it since 2006. Patients need it monthly. So the average Lucentis patient, and there's gazillions of them in Ontario alone, costs virtually the same amount. And that's an infinite, virtually, supply of patients. As opposed to here, we're talking about a relatively finite number. The Foundation Fighting Blindness estimates about perhaps 1,000 to 1,500 patients in Canada would be eligible for an Argus implant based on our current criteria for inclusion. So it should be a relatively easy argument with the government to get coverage. I'm confident that we will get it. The future is very exciting. I think these implants have come a long, long way, but just like electronics have developed over the years so amazingly, I think we're going to see some really staggering improvements over time. Soon, incorporated into that external computer will be Zoom software so that patients will be able to enlarge what they see. There's going to be color vision software. The next iteration, the Argus 3, is going to have over 200 electrodes, not 60 electrodes. And we're starting a collaboration with Google Glass, too. So who knows exactly what and where this is going to go, but I think it's going to advance a lot quicker than any of us anticipate, and the potential patients that will benefit from this will likewise expand in a very exciting and fast way. And I think that's all I have. Thank you. Both Orly Shamir and Ian Nichols are here today, which we're very grateful that they're here. If you want to stand up and identify yourselves, our two patients. And I don't think one can over-dramatize how brave these two people are and were. Yes, the technology is exciting, but we had very frank discussions before the surgery about the newness and uncertainty of the surgery. They've both done extremely well, but let's not trivialize this. This is a big operation. It's about as big an eye operation as one can have. It's done under general anesthesia, which we hardly do any operations under general anesthesia. It's a big operation. It's an invasive operation with a lot of hardware, a lot of manipulating. Every major step we've learned over the years in retinal surgery that the eye can tolerate essentially is rolled into this one operation. So it's a big operation. The recovery is not trivial, and they were very brave to embark on it. But I think they're happy that they did it, and I think it's turning out in a very exciting way. I'd like to invite Orly up, and I think she's going to say a few brief words, and then we'll open it up to questions that people have, and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. Thank you.
So first of all, I'm after listening to Dr. Devenyi's description of what went on, even though I've heard it many times, I'm so thankful I was under general anesthetic. My journey in this whole project and clinical trial began at a bar. I participate and proudly participate in Cycle for Sight. And personally, I've raised $23,000 over the years, so I'm very proud of that. And I'm so proud to be part of the Foundation Fighting Blindness in any way I can. So I was at a Cycle for Sight event, and Dr. Devenyi was presenting and talked about his the clinical trial and who would be a good candidate, and talking about his the whole project. And I thought that I would really love to meet him and introduce myself. So I did what everybody is told not to do. I picked him up from a bar, and then found myself under the knife 3 months later. So I must trust this wonderful doctor. I introduced myself, and I've had on several occasions I've had people ask me, why did you consent to doing this, or did it take time to decide? And I realized that I knew right away that this is what I want to do. I entered into the clinical trial with no hesitation. I went through the process. The first part of this process is to undergo several tests to make sure I'm eligible. And that is also eligible to make sure that my eye is there's enough room in the back to house all this technology. And there was a lot of tests that I had to undergo. And thankfully, I was a candidate, and honestly, I entered it with no hesitation, and that's how I feel of what I'm here to do, is to help things move forward for the future. I asked a lot of questions, and honestly, it's been an interesting experience. The surgery itself, yes, was major. And I had to be asleep knowing I was being filmed, which was very, very nerve-wracking. At first, there was a period of time where I had to rest and get past a few days of discomfort. What was very important to me right after surgery is that I really wanted to continue my promise and my dedication to Cycle for Sight. So 2 weeks later, I cycled 102 kilometers. So I'm glad that I was able to continue with my commitment. I started off about 2.5 weeks later in rehab, and it was exactly like going back to kindergarten. The rehab worker and I started off, and I had an easel that I had when I was with her at the hospital. I also had one when I took one home, and on one side it was black, on the other it's white, and then I had magnetic shapes, and started slowly to train my brain to recognize the contrast, to start seeing the outline of the various shapes. And it's a very slow process. It could take up to 1 to 2 years for my brain to learn to the full capacity of what this technology can offer. I'm in the process now of getting someone to come out to my home and start learning how to use it in day-to-day life, walking, cooking in the kitchen, seeing objects on a counter, all those things. And it's a fascinating process to go through. And what I'm looking forward to is all this advancement. I know with technology, everything moves so quickly, so really, who knows what's going to be in a year, 2 years, 3 years. It's very promising. And right now, it's just the beginning. I'm able to detect, the test that you saw on the screen where I was pointing at the square on the computer screen, when I did that in May, I actually shocked myself because I couldn't find the square. And I have a bit of light perception, but I didn't realize my vision had decreased to that degree. And it was a very emotional experience for me. And when, after the 3 months, I was able to find that square and see it and detect it, it was an incredible, incredible feeling. And all I could say is with the dedication, the staff, Dr. Devenyi is phenomenal at his art. And because of the foundation, that's why this clinical trial is possible. Okay, that's it, the end.
Thank you. A big hand of applause for Orly Shamir, please, everyone. That was awesome. We don't have as much time for questions as I know you all would like, but there was so hard for me to not to cut anybody off because the information you're getting today is just so wonderful. But we do have time for a couple questions, so if you'll please put up your hand, our mic runners will come to you. I think we have the first question right now. Can you speak loudly?
Are these electrodes forever or they deteriorate?
Can you repeat the question?
About the electrodes that are implanted.
The hope and the expectation is that it's forever. One can't say with any definitive certainty, only because they haven't been around that long. You know, the longest implants have now been in for about 2.5 years. But we see no reason why. The materials that are in there, be it the silicone and the titanium tacks, those for other procedures we've used in retinal surgery and have been in for 20, 30, 40 years. So we have no reason to think that they won't be in forever.
Okay. Is there a possibility that this device would make it so that way a person could be able to see what, quote unquote, a sighted person would be able to see? Or is there just a limited amount where, you can only get to a level and that's the end?
I don't think we know that. The hope is that it will become more and more, quote unquote, normal vision. As the software improves, as potentially the number of electrodes improves, that is the hope. There's, interestingly, and you see some of the people here, there's a very interesting documentary being made on this whole journey. It's going to be called Light, Darkness, Light by Transient Films. And one of the aspects of the documentary will be a visual recreation of the images that patients are seeing now, because what's so fascinating is, yes, these people lost their vision by the time they had surgery, but they remember having had vision in the past. So with their eloquence and their ability to describe what they see now and what they remember that they've seen in the past, the filmmakers will be recreating the type of vision that is being seen now, and I think we'll only over time see that improve and change.
I was wondering, when you showed the picture of the person in the white squares, how far away was the person from the square before they could see it?
Well, they're meant to be just at a desk. It was at a desktop computer, and she was just, it was a touch screen. So, but that will translate into actual visual acuity. The best acuities that we've been able to have in people who've had these implants is most patients learn to ambulate, walk around safely. They can reach for things on tables. Some can see large letters, like the size of an E about 3-4 inches high.
Okay, I have a question. My doctor, Dr. Vale, who's passed away, I had him for many, many years. I have RP since I was 20 years old. I'm 68 today. Nothing has been done about my eyes. I lost my sight progressively and so on. But Dr. Vale, before he died, he told me that my optic nerve was dead. Now, because of that, would I be erased from becoming a candidate for this type of procedure?
I knew Dr. Vale very well, and he was a really very excellent person and a very excellent ophthalmologist. But I think that would have to still be assessed very carefully, because typically the optic nerve stays okay in retinitis pigmentosa, and that is, as you suggest, key to these implants working, because the rods and cones, the receptors degenerate, but we depend on the optic nerve to be the pathway by which these images get to the brain. So we do have tests as part of the pre-op testing that assess the viability of the nerve, and yes, the nerve has to work in order for this implant to work. But usually with retinitis pigmentosa, it's not affected.
So, doctor, right now the Argus 2 has 60 electrodes. I'm here. And then the next one is going to have 200 electrodes. I see this as the first cell phone, the brick. And potentially 3 years from now, you could have an electrode with 1,000. There's somebody who's on 60 electrode now. The question is, if you're on Argus 2, and if there's Argus 4 and Argus 5 in 3 years, how is it possible for them to transition from 60 to whatever that might be there?
I think it's a good question, and I think it's something that both these patients had to think about, and we had discussions. First of all, we don't know if 200 electrodes is better than 60. We don't know if 2,000 is better than 60. It's better in a television, but whether the nerves in the eye can tell the difference, that remains to be seen, and we don't know. Assuming that it is, we would certainly be reluctant to remove these ones. It's not a trivial operation. Once it's been in there for a while, it would be a much bigger deal to take it out. It gets scarred in there, etc. But as we talked with both these patients, there would always be the possibility of putting it into their other eye, which would make sense.
Yeah.